So my name is Maggie Rarieya, and I'll be taking us through this session. Really a reflective moment, but also a moment for us to consider the actions we want to take. While we're still waiting for people to join, a brief intro. I'm a fellow from the League, and I'm today joining you from London, but I also live in Kenya, so I'm a serial traveler. And I welcome you to please just on the chat, kindly indicate where you're dialing from, your name and where you're dialing from. And Daniel, I'll be looking to you to let me know if we should kick off after people have done their intros. Thank you.
Yeah, you're good to go, Maggie. Thank you, and welcome everyone.
Great. And you can see my slide? Because I can't see it where I'm at. I'm kind of blind. Okay, fantastic. So I come with a history or an area of working within the profit, non-profit sectors. And I feel like my leadership journey has been an intersection of strategic leadership, as well as change management, as well as ESG. And I'm getting into a point in my life where there's a lot of reflection, and I want to welcome you into that space where we can reflect on really leadership values that I've seen in others, I've seen myself taken in, and what it would take us to embrace what I would call regenerative leadership. And I wonder again if in exploring what regenerative leadership is, you could feel free to put in the chat, and I cannot see the chat, I can only see faces right now, what you see regenerative leadership as. So what do you see it as? What does it mean to you? And since I can't read the chat, I'll ask if anybody's written anything, Danny or Angie. Not yet? Okay, I hope you'll have some reflections as we go along regenerative leadership. I'm sharing with you the agenda of what we'll be discussing. And if you see me looking on the side, it's because one side I can see the slides that I want to take you through, and the other I get to see all the beautiful faces. So I need to look at the slides at some point. And so the agenda is there. It's we're going to have the next about 50 or so minutes to discuss regenerative leadership. And I'll start with setting up agreements. How do we want this conversation to flow? And I'm using the word conversation very purposefully because I'm in my living room, and I'm inviting you to my living room so that we can have a conversation, and make it informal. I'll share my personal story. A bit of warning, hindsight is 2020, so you might get a linear version of a story that is actually in reality quite up and down. And then I'd want us to look at defining regenerative leadership and some moment for interactive reflection before we look at what actions can we take as we close off. And
Maggie,
so
there are some comments in the chat if you
in
want
the
me
chat.
to read them. I can read them to you.
Yes, go ahead.
Alex says that it's a way to lead that enables all lives to thrive. And then Kathy says regenerative leadership for me is one that emphasizes collaborative, healing, reciprocal relationships instead of extractive practices.
Wonderful. I see that people.
We have one more of A. I'm sorry, I don't know your name. It says only an A, and it says leadership that is about social inclusive.
Okay.
Andrea, thank you.
Okay, thanks, Danny. Appreciate it. And actually, now I can see some things that are coming in. I can see them at the bottom of the picture. So yes, you've all captured aspects of what regenerative leadership is. And it's great you're coming in with that knowledge. I feel like we can together enrich the conversation around what we can do in order to espouse that. And so what I'm putting up in front of you is just agreements. Like I said, in the living room, let's have a conversation. Let's feel free to ask questions. I may not have all the answers. Nobody may, and it's okay to put the questions there. We can always come back to them when we feel we're better prepared. Agree to disagree, because there'll be different voices, and that's okay. It's okay to not agree, but we can progress. And I ask for your permission as the facilitator of this session. Allow me to intervene. We have about 50 minutes now, so I will need us to move on, and we can put things in the parking lot. So what is next? Anything that, please put on the chat again. If you think there's an agreement that haven't voiced out that you think should be part of it, please put it in the chat, and Danny will bring it to my attention, and we can take it on as we go along. Okay. So now I want to just tell you that, hindsight is 2020, and this is the story I'm going to tell you, which will make it look like my life has been linear, but it's my actual experience of leadership has had its ups and downs. So allow me to give you the polished version, which you can poke holes in when we have conversations later. And I guess first thing I'm going to ask is, imagine your first leadership moment, whether it was informal or formal. And how did it feel for you? Were you thrilled for the opportunity? Were you somewhat overwhelmed? What kind of experience did it mean for you? And now I want to tell you what mine did. I hold that question as I start my story of my journey. And my first leadership moment came in high school. As a prefect, I was elected by my classmates to be a prefect. And I was excited at the opportunity. I wanted to do it exactly right. And what it ended up being is I, was harassing the girls to leave the dorm early. I wanted us to be the first in the classrooms. There was no giggling, there was no talking. In short, I had a reign of terror. And the girls absolutely hated me, could not wait for that moment to go. So there was a little celebration at the end of the term when I had to give up my prefect role and pass the badge on to someone else. And I was deeply hurt because I was trying to make us the best. And, it took me the next 4 years in that same school to rebuild the relationships that I had destroyed during my reign of terror. And I got to understand from that incident that, honestly, leadership is about going with empathy. It isn't about control. It's about connection. How do you connect people with you? And when you lead with empathy, people will follow you because they want to, not because they have to. And so those were lessons that I learned, and I've tried to keep in my head as my leadership journey has continued. And so I want to fast forward to my next role. So where the pills indicate I was in GSK, I worked in the pharmaceutical sector. And I remember it was a time where the HIV pandemic was big. And unfortunately, the majority, at least the populations that I lived amongst, were not able to afford the medication. And here I was working in an organization that made the solution, and yet we couldn't get it to the people. And I had to ask myself a question around, instead of how do we make it really work? How do we manage to sell our products to who does this really work for? Is this working for communities, or is it working for the organization only? And that, I don't know if you've had that moment in your life where you've thought the change I want to do and the place I'm at, it's too big for me. I can't do anything, maybe some kind of paralysis. But for me, where it took me was I was also taking an MBA at the time, and I thought to myself, how can I make my thesis be about this? And I did a thesis on the role of pharmaceutical companies on the HIV pandemic, and had really big questions, which I sent as a form of survey to our senior leadership to also provoke them in this thinking. And it might not have changed the scale completely, but it sowed some seeds that for me felt like I was taking a step at a time. And now I'll fast forward to Diageo, my time in the drinks industry. And I hope I said in my career, I've had quite a bit of twists and turns in organizations that I've worked with. And in Diageo, the leadership or the opportunity I saw was to step in with courage. Courage because I worked for a premium spirits organization, the biggest, at least at that time. And yet I saw a need, and I worked in innovation, and there was a need within, again, the communities and population that I lived amongst that was for non-alcoholic beverages. There was a desire for that. So trying to get that through a system that knew about spirits and producing spirits and premium alcoholic, and changing the mindset into adults, non-alcoholic beverage. It was a Herculean task, but it allowed the organization to do a lot of listening to what do people want. And so that empathy came into, we're not just selling to sell, we're listening to what people want and reflecting it. And fast forward again to my time in Submiller. Actually, I think that the Submiller was my next opportunity where I worked in the global marketing team, and it was a time where the organization was going through a turning point and looking at how can we look at our communities not just as extractive, and Kafi, you talked about extractive, but how do we see the opportunity for organization to prosper while our communities are prospering? How to put that reciprocity? And so my role then was to look at within the marketing teams, and it was something I put my hand up for. What can we do with our huge budgets that isn't about advertising only? What can we do that can support communities and drive the ability for the brands to deliver real brand love, because the communities appreciate what you're doing, not just the advertisements that are there. And so that became the journey of what we called creating playbooks on how our brands could show up differently, act differently, be different, and see an opportunity for communities to play a central role. And following that was when Submiller was taken over by Anheuser-Busch InBev, and talk about a giant clash of cultures. It was a big moment, and it was also a trying time. Motivation dropped, as is often the case when mergers take place, and people stopped seeing themselves as part of the system. There was a mental checkout. And this time for me was to look at how do I work, for example, with HR. I did not work in the HR team, but how do we deal with the demotivated staff that was there? And I'd seen a thing somewhere else that had been done, and I thought it was fun. And I looked at how do we bring our people in the center instead of the competition to collaboration, for example. And we introduced the Pro Bono Skills Marathon, where we got people, employees, to provide skills to NGO social enterprises that were within the geography. And the whole idea was people had a lot of skills and energy, but were confused at this time. How could they put them to good use and fill a void that was immediately in the surrounding? And so this pro bono skills marathon became very competitive. And actually, what surprised those of us who started it was even beyond the time that we had scheduled to run these skills marathon, the employees wanted and continued to support the gaps that they had seen within these NGOs and social enterprises. They felt like there was something more meaningful they were doing, and they wanted to see that to its success. And needless to say, also the motivation and the cooperation between what was ex-SAB with ABI teams really flourished during that time. I'll go to, sorry, I'm trying to move into the next object. Yes. And now I go into the time for the COVID pandemic, where I had the opportunity to lead the secretariat of coalition of 40 plus entities that came together to support the government of Kenya and a Ministry of Health specifically in addressing the pandemic. And the coalition ended up, recruited about 40 organizations, public, private sector, CSOs. So there was quite a diverse range of organizations that were there. And each partner came with their own priorities, their perspectives, and their personalities. And really the big challenge there was, how do we ground people towards a shared purpose and look at how our deeper need was for the survival of the communities, the survival of the vulnerable groups, and to stop the pandemic from having really devastating effects. And it was just critical creating that shared purpose. And that really helped us reach over 24 million people with behavior change messaging, with life supplies. And a very interesting opportunity came for very unlike organizations to come in and for competitors. I remember we had Unilever and Reckitt Benckiser sitting at a table and wanting to collaborate because we were joined by a shared purpose. And finally, I'll close this story with my time at AMREF, which was my last role. And one of the main things I did was to champion climate and health justice. And it's a moment where we're all seeing the effects of climate change directly on the vulnerable communities. And as AMREF, we stood forward and were representing the region in how this needed to be addressed. Besides that, I saw an opportunity and a role for organization in actually helping us do what we were advocating externally, internally. So an alignment of not just promoting the climate justice, but our internal practices being aligned with what we were saying. And that led to the first ESG policy for AMREF being developed and promoting that as a way for us to capture indigenous knowledge and what the wisdom we had with how we're going to run our operational practices, our programs to really embed and align our advocacy on climate and health with our internal opportunity to clean up house and really follow what we practice. And so I conclude that by asking you to reflect. I've used my journey, but I'm sure you can think about yours and just ask yourself, where have there been moments in your life or in your leadership where you've either felt misaligned or you felt like you were being led in a controlling manner, or you felt there was lack of connectedness? And how could you potentially change that? How, think about some of the regenerative practices that are there. what could you change around that? So I don't know if anybody wants to go ahead, either thinking through my story, thinking of their story, anything you want to share around what regenerative leadership could have or could mean for you now, given what you've heard of my personal story. Any comments? No comments? Okay, then I'll ask you this other question. What do you think it would mean if we led like nature? So just think about nature is something we encounter every day. What would that mean for you? What if we led like nature? What are some of the things that could come through for you? Still crickets?
I have something to say. I can add, if you may.
Yes,
Good
please.
morning.
Yes.
I would say align your core values and your mission with your passions and shared interests, and therefore you can connect in with your intuition and other people that align more with what you're trying to convey throughout your work, your service, your community, and that will shape your perspective, and you'll have a better understanding of yourself and of others. Thank you.
Thank you. That's Andrea. That's A.
Andrea,
Yeah.
yes, I will change that.
Yeah. Thank you for that. I totally agree. An alignment and it can come through finding like-minded. It can come through having empathy for others who are not like-minded, but trying to understand their perspective and bringing it in, and grounding it in the whole being the sum of its parts. How do you actually give more by coming together as a result of that alignment? Any other person with a comment?
I'd like to add, thank you, Maggie, for sharing your
Yeah.
story. It was really, I really loved learning about your journey, and it made me laugh when I heard about you being the prefect, right? The elected prefect, and, having your reign of terror. Because I remember being elected prefect myself. I did not have a reign of terror, though. But I just remember the process of your classmates, and I went to an all-girls school, and the process of your classmates looking at you, the way you function, and liking that so much that they chose you, right? And elected you to lead them. But there's also that now that you've brought it out and I think about it, there's also the pressure of coming from the top, right? Because you have the principal and the teachers expecting the girls in school to function a particular way, and your classmates see you as the prefect to do a particular thing, but then the administration also sees you as a prefect and has certain demands on you as well. And at the age of 11, 12, 13, you don't have the skill set, right? You don't have the necessary full capacity to manage that very well. So I appreciated that you brought that out, because now it's taking me back to that time so that I can kind of think through my experience there as well. So I appreciated that. But what I wanted to say about the in this particular slide, what if we led like nature? For me, when I think of that, I think of being in the flow. Because the sun, right? Nature has a flow and a rhythm to it, and it's not forced, and you cannot force it, right? The sun rises at its own time. It sets at its own time. The wind blows a particular way. It blows a particular way through trees. It blows a particular way through grass. There's a flow. Birds chirp. They have their own communication. So when I think about leading the way nature leads and shows us, I think about being in the flow and the rhythm of, and not forcing things to happen. So you don't force relationships, you don't force partnerships, you just find that flow and let that flow truly guide and shape what is to happen, knowing that there is an innate intelligence in what is taking place.
Well said. Yeah, well said, Kathy. Before I make any comment, please, Shayna, I really love what you said, and please, Shayna, please, jump in and add to that. Can't hear you, Shayna.
I think you're on mute, right?
Mute still, unless.
There, thank you. Sorry. It's just after 6 a.m. here. So
Oh.
apologies, I'm huddled in a corner of my house so as to not wake others. Your beautiful question, Maggie, reminds me of a book that some of us in the League of Intrapreneurs here actually just discussed as like a book club. And the book is called The Service Berry. It's by an American First Nations author called Robin Wall Kammerer. But the crux that I get from that book, and I hear in your question, is what do we get if we're guided or if we lead like nature, is trust. You trust the sun rises every day and sets. There is an inherent reciprocity that you don't need to build or make or lobby for or elect or back. It just is. And I don't know for the rest of you, but Maggie, when I hear your story about these highlights in your career, I'm guessing somewhere in those equations you had high trust. And I know that to be true for me. The things I am most proud about at work are when it was unquestionable. I was held, I was trusted, didn't have to spend time on that. I just did the work with good people. So that's what I learned from nature.
Fantastic, fantastic, Shana. I couldn't agree more. Is there anybody else who wants to jump in?
Yeah, I want to add, and thank you, Shana, because I was about to bring it up. Because the concept that it was coming for me is care. There's also about the book, the economy of care. And I feel nature has this quality, this capability of like tremendous deep care for every being. And with this flow that Kathy was bringing, also the rhythm, and then from what you were sharing, Shana, is this creating the conditions, right? It's like nature is not controlling, it's not like putting things, it's just holding a space for everything to flourish and putting like the right condiments, like the amount of sunshine, the amount of rain, how the soil needs to be, but then the flower blooms by itself because the conditions are there. So I feel is that instead of just trying to manipulate or control or like all of this that it's imposed into a more mechanistic way, it's more on the other side of doing less in a way, but allowing things to emerge.
Thanks, Danny. I couldn't agree more. In fact, Shana, just reflecting back to your point about different parts of, the highlights that I've shared. And I must say, during the collaboration, the bringing together 40 plus organization, it did involve a lot of trust. I mean, to run that complex collaboration with the different personalities, meeting in a crisis situation, it was building trust virtually, getting people to believe in a joint purpose and just believing that what you're doing is inherently right and people coming on that journey with you. Absolutely. And Kathy, just, you really talked about top down and leadership that comes from top down. And I will say, like the example of Diageo for me was when we were listening, when we were allowing the down, what were the communities actually asking for versus what's the product we want to give them? How do you make that part of what the organization can learn and grow instead of what the organization wants to do because it's always done it? How do you allow for that listening to come up and for the voice from below to be heard right above? So a lot of that and ultimately going with the flow and not pushing, learning not to push when it's not needed. Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So yes, the quote that I hope you've all had a chance to read is, as we look at the 21st century and all the tech that's happening there. I have to look on the side because that's where I can see this slide. The breakthroughs of the 21st century will not occur because of technology, but they will occur because of an expanding concept of what it means to be human. And to me, that summarizes nicely what humanity can stand for, that technology could, at least until today, not replicate. Thank you, Kayla. So thinking of the things that you've just heard now, moving from control to connection, from extraction to reciprocity, efficiency, like what I saw when I was at GSK, to actually having empathy, and potential competition with AB InBev to actually collaboration because we can come together and do good. What, and if you think to maybe a situation you're in, I put it here as either internal initiative or a leadership challenge or whatever you're in, and just reflect in your minds and think, are you espousing some or any of these things? Is there an opportunity for you to reconsider how you're currently engaging with someone? Could be a spouse, could be a colleague, could be whoever. Is there an opportunity for you to really look at how you could review that differently if you were applying some of what we're saying are regenerative principles and leadership qualities? And I don't know if anyone would want to share, whether on the chat or just put up your hand and speak, or unmute yourself and speak about a situation that you're facing that you think or you would like to consider how regenerative leadership principles could be part of it.
Hello, perhaps I would like to add some few information. I liked what I heard up to now concerning the trust, the relationship, the connection. So I think that this is a movement that we are testimonying across the world. And I would say that today we face several challenges in the several dimensions. And when we compare with the case study of the pandemic, there was one big priority. So all the stakeholders were aligned in the same direction and the same purpose and goal that was to put the people safe. But today, as there is a multiple challenge, the leadership role is more complex. Even if the threats are not so huge as the COVID, the leadership is more complex because we have somehow not one direction set at the top, but several directions that we can travel. And for me, what is the more complex is, as we are still managing old wild organization and corporation that are technically more based on the control function, control leadership, even if somehow they already has evolved to institutional leadership. That is, they already has a role as a stakeholder on the global scene, but there is still a gap. There is still a long way to go until we reach the same alignment, as you mentioned, as if it was a nature-based leadership style, what I consider to be a transformational leadership. This means that it depends on the situation. It must transform the community or the organization or the corporation or the nation. So how will be addressed this new era? And you talk about the technology, the artificial intelligence, and we know today that the human intelligence will be more important than all the technology or all the AI intelligence. So what will be in terms of leadership? How can we leverage? How can we empower today these new leaders and ourselves taking into account that we are facing a systematic problem. I don't know if you can, if you have a view or if you can advance.
I'll try yeah, so it I have understood you, and maybe I'll focus on the last bit. I hear the frustration, and you are right in saying maybe it was a unique set of circumstances that helped very diverse actors come together in the example of the coalition. I wish you were there at the time, because when you look at it, you say, okay, it was unique, but they were very competitive, even in that, and everybody had their agenda. Even if it's to help, it was, what's it going to mean for me? So even in moments where it looks like everything is set for it to work, there's the individual agendas that can really become hard. And the reality is, this is where we get to practice empathy. What really means so much to this person in this organization, and how can it be integrated in what we're doing? So and this is why we're here as individuals, to say that the change starts from us. How do we start reflecting some of these leadership behaviors that we want to see in the organization? You talked about control. How do we start looking at how we build connections? And instead of fighting or competing, how do we become the voice and the actors within organizations, within our homes, within the society, that shows a different way of leading? So there's an opportunity for us to step up, and people seeing that, seeing how it is giving good results, will also want to emulate what we're doing. So you do raise a good point about a leadership challenge.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Yes, yes.
Maggie,
So anybody, yeah?
Yeah, there is one story in the chat that I want to read out loud, because Anne is sitting in a cafe and it's too loud.
Okay.
So yes, she said, I would like to share a story, but I'm sitting in a cafe in Chiang Mai and they are playing live music. So
okay.
It was at the business decelerator of Big Bullock a while ago, and I had one moment that taught me a lot in life, but also management leadership. We had a moment to strike through the woods and meditate, and one direction drew my attention. There was a huge old tree that had been ripped out halfway, but some of its roots were still in the earth because there was a small tree holding it and keeping it from falling and hence dying. So sometimes you've got to learn on others. You had to lean on others, and they may be stronger and more capable of things you would not imagine of their appearance. Lesson learned: trust in your team, trust others.
Wonderful. I'm glad that was shared. Thank you. And it's great that you've been able to put that. Absolutely, trust. And trust keeps coming up as one of the things, because sometimes we think, even when it comes to a matter of change, that we must be the ones who are doing it. I love this, that you can lean on others, you can trust others, and you can let others, provide the leadership when it needs to be done. Okay, I think just moving on to that, having had, if what we talked about, regenerative leadership, and the challenge for you to consider looking at starting with yourself. So before we point the finger to this person needs to be more than this and that, what about yourself? If you had to take on one action, one mindset that you would want to take on now, really now, not for next year or when you're in a particular position, what can you take from what we've just had about nature, what we've had about regenerative leadership, that you can apply into your life? And just pop it in the chat. You could speak about it if you want, but pop it in the chat if that's easier for you. Just a commitment to one action, one thing you could take that would help you practice this regenerative leadership. Anyone?
Maybe staying with that question from before, like one mindset shift would be like, what would nature do in this situation, for example? So like putting myself in that position of like, what would a tree do, or how would a tree respond? What would nature do? What would the soil respond to a specific event? Maybe that helps me to ground myself in this mindset.
So for you, Danny, thank you. It's just reflecting how nature behaves, and saying that's what you consciously be looking at nature to give you your cues in order that you can apply them. That's great. Anyone else who has a commitment or a plan that they could consider on regenerative leadership?
Shayna wrote in the chat, she said, root, ground as a daily meditative practice. Not everything needs to happen above the soil line. Love that.
Wow. Wow. Yes. Yes. Actually, sometimes the above ground is a lot more, I guess, maybe misleading than what's actually happening right under. And sometimes you need to be there, just then, and in this reflective space, because regenerative leadership also means taking some time, having that quiet and letting the quiet inspire, not always acting and doing and coming in, letting the quiet give us time to really listen to what could be the answers. Okay. So Andrea, you say, since I'm reserved and quiet, I let things slide instead of speak. Okay, then it's gone from my view. So Danny, maybe you could help me read that one.
Yeah, it says, since I'm reserved and quiet, I let things slide instead of speaking up because I don't wish to have conflict or offend others, although I know something was done out of my control to hurt situations. Stand up and stay mindful to you won't hurt yourself. Tranquility.
Okay. Okay. So sometimes it means standing up and speaking up. Is that what I heard, Danny? Sorry, at the end? Yes, yes.
Yes.
Absolutely, absolutely. When is the right time to also, yes, take action and stand up and stand up for what you really believe could make a change. So yeah, in my invitation to you to reflect, I guess you know, what we have said right now is keep looking for where there's opportunities to connect rather to collide. Maybe that's one thing you can see even when you're having difficult conversations with people who have polar ideas from you, and that is quite true of today's world. What is it that could connect? You know, how does nature allow very different kind of things come in? How do you have, you know, summer and you have winter, and they all exist in nature? What ways could you allow for that differences to come in and not conflict, but to find a rhythm that could actually add to the beauty of whatever challenge or opportunity that's there?
Maggie, I saw Keith had raised his hand.
Okay, sorry, I didn't see that.
No worries.
I really like this thread of the conversation. Where my head was at is concept of going slow to go fast. I think one of the things you can learn from nature is for a long time, it looks like nothing's happening. Things are evolving, the foundation is forming, and then all of a sudden it blooms. I think that's a really true analogy for a lot of the work we do. I think there's a lot of pressure to push things forward quickly. A lot of the things we're working on are urgent problems, but all these things we're talking about, like trust, take time to form, and giving it time to actually form in a solid ways, it kind of helps you go faster in the long run.
Absolutely, absolutely, Keith. And I couldn't agree more. As change makers, the hunger for change or the passion for what we want to do can sometimes override, as you said, what could be the right thing to do, which is take time in order to set the right foundation for the change to take effect. Yeah, and sometimes, yeah, that's what it needs. Thank you so much for sharing. Anyone else? I think there was a comment that was coming through before.
Yes, it was from Anne also. It's about resilience. Said she just learned that trees in Australia don't die after a big bushfire. They create new miniature branches. So this is a nice metaphor for resilience. And then Jolana said that this is also true with olive trees. There's incredible resilience in nature.
Wonderful. Yes, actually, that's true. And sometimes what looks like shrinking back is actually just building internal strength to even spring back. Yeah, spring back and spring back bigger and better. Absolutely. And a lot of these, what we're sharing, sometimes can feel counterintuitive for driving change, but they are actually the core pillars, the key elements of making change successful and building your own ability to drive change to the end. So I really just want to thank you for sharing those commitments. And even for those who haven't shared, I imagine there's some reflection that you're holding or some inspiration you're taking from others that you want to take forward in your area of resilient leadership. And so,
Maggie,
yes,
can I just add something?
please do.
I think I was listening carefully to everybody's thoughts, which were really great. And what I've noticed and also learned and keep practicing, I think over the last few years, is humility. And especially, I think, as a base for trust, for care, for empathy. I think for a lot of things that we've been talking about, and in leadership, unfortunately, is not always as seen as positively as I think it could. And especially in the context you were asking around those mindset shifts, I was thinking, when we're facing problem, I know that for a long time I've been thinking I need to find a solution and then come with a solution to that meeting, to that situation, to whatever it is. And then actually I thought, no, actually, maybe me on my own is not the best way to solve this problem. And actually having the humility to say, I have this problem, I'm not too sure how to face it or how to go about it, and then figure it out together. I found that has been actually really, really helpful, and then also powerful in terms of the solutions, the durability of the solutions, and interconnectedness that happens.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Alex. I couldn't agree more. And it actually also resonates with, I forget the name of the person who's in the Loud Cafe, about leaning on others, the humility and leaning on others and trusting, comes back to trusting that you, and believing that you may not be the only one who can come with a solution. So trusting others to support you in that and to take you along. And together, again, the sum will be greater than, the whole will be greater than the sum of its parts. So if you do give yourself time to listen to others, involve others, bring them along with you, then you'll probably have a much better chance of succeeding than the one-man show. Fantastic.
I will say that trust is exactly the perfect word for the fragmented world that we are facing now. So I think that if we can have a takeaway from this session, it is the trust that I think also is within the nature and all the elements that are in the forest or in the sea. This is the trust within and between all the elements. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Helena. Trust seems to be the word that keeps coming again and again, and it is a clear component and something that takes a long time to build. So as Keith said, putting it and letting it simmer there, even when it's relationships or as Alex has said, with projects, not or situations, not always going first, but sometimes bringing others along and taking the journey of trust. Trusting others will share your passion. Trusting others will have different opportunities to contribute and make the idea greater. Trusting others that they will support you along this journey. And I know we have a few more minutes, but I have something here, a quote, and this is from the League, right from the League website, that just reminds us that we're not separate from nature. We're a thread in the web of life. And all this healing, and Helena, I heard you when you were talking about, what's the crisis that's happening now in the world, and that's why regenerative leadership, if anything, is needed now more than ever, for that healing of ourselves and the earth. It's the same process. So we need to start with ourselves. We need to start by looking at nature and to understand that ultimately leadership isn't a title or a position. It is a behavior. And I took that quote from something Danny had shared with me. So I would ask you to think about what the behavior you can start putting in place that will show others how they can be. So I want to close with that. And as we close, just maybe, again, feel free to share either on the chat or open how you feel about this. Does this make you feel a bit more empowered around regenerative leadership? Does it make you think a little bit about, I need to go and dig deeper? Does it make you feel like I need to look for people who are like-minded? And the League of Entrepreneurs is a place where you can find that. What does it make you feel? And you can show it as a sign, or you can type it on the chat, or you can speak it out. Anybody wants to say what the feeling after this session? Has anything shifted for you? Are you in the same place? Are you more curious?
I'm more inspired about regenerative leadership. Thank you.
Thank you, Helena. Helena said inspired. I can speak on, for me, I feel just by talking through and hearing different perspectives, I feel like there's a readiness, like what Keith said, that things are happening. There's something happening down there. It's under the ground, or I might be mixing Keith and someone else who also said something is happening. It's bubbling, and it's great for me because it means there's a desire, and when there's a desire, action will follow eventually at the right time. So I feel very hopeful. I'll use the word hopeful as the way to describe it. And I encourage you to also share it in one word. You don't have to say a sentence that makes you, that you feel after having this discussion.
Maggie, there are comments in the chat, and I personally resonate a lot with what Shayna shared. She said she feels reminded. Smiling again, less lonely in brave and caring leadership. Alex said, I feel more open to lean into this space more and more. And Andrea said, very empowered and inspired for trusting and digging deeper for like-minded people that flow with your natural vibes. Many thanks. Great lessons for the flow of good social nature, like a fresh rainforest.
Oh, wonderful. Wonderful. All right, then. I'm touched that you came in. I appreciate you came into my living room and you've allowed for this conversation to happen. And look forward to connecting, because we are believers in this, and it's now for us to follow. Thank you so much, and do have a wonderful rest of your week, and enjoy the rest of the Global Entrepreneurship Week. Bye-bye.